It was supposed to be a quick trip to the grocery store, nothing out of the ordinary, just another routine errand with my service dog, Atlas, by my side. The German Shepherd was easily recognizable in his bright blue vest marked service dog. Do not distract, moving with a quiet discipline that came from years of training. I had done this countless times before, weaving through aisles, grabbing what I needed, and heading for checkout without issue. But that day, something, or rather, someone, changed everything. I noticed her from the corner of my eye before she made her presence known. A woman in her mid-50s with a severe bob haircut, pursed lips, and a sharp, judgmental gaze locked onto Atlas like he was a ticking time bomb instead of a medical necessity. At first, I ignored her, assuming she'd move along, but the longer I shopped, the more apparent it became that she was following me, peering around shelves, huffing indignantly when she saw Atlas calmly trotting beside me. Then, right as I reached for a box of cereal, she finally made her move. "Excuse me," she said, voice dripping with artificial sweetness, "but dogs aren't allowed in here." I turned to her, keeping my voice even. "He's a service dog," I explained, gesturing toward the clearly visible patches on his vest. "He's allowed under ADA law." Her expression soured instantly, lips curling in distaste as she crossed her arms. "I don't think so," she scoffed. "I know the store policy, and only guide dogs are allowed." That was my first sign that this was going to be more than just a minor inconvenience. I'd encountered misinformed people before, but something about her posture, her self-assured smirk, the way she squared her shoulders like she was challenging me, told me she wasn't just ignorant. She was on a mission to prove me wrong. I sighed, mentally preparing for the exhausting battle ahead. "Actually," I started patiently, "service dogs are permitted under federal law, regardless of the store's policy. The ADA protects their right to accompany their handlers in public places. But Karen, as I had already dubbed her in my mind, was not interested in logic or legality. "I highly doubt that," she snapped. "And honestly, you don't look disabled. What's wrong with you that you need a dog?" My stomach tightened at her audacity. Strangers had no right to demand explanations for my medical conditions, but people like Karen never seemed to understand that. "My medical history isn't your business," I said firmly, adjusting my grip on the shopping cart and taking a step forward, signaling that I was done with this conversation. But Karen wasn't. She stepped into my path, blocking my way with a smug little smile that made my skin crawl. "If you don't tell me what's wrong with you, then how do I know you're not just faking it to bring your pet inside?" My patience, already thin, was wearing to the breaking point. "Because that would be illegal," I shot back. "And because I know my rights." Atlas, sensing my rising stress, pressed gently against my leg, grounding me the way he was trained to do. But before I could push past her, Karen pulled out her phone with a triumphant look. "If you're not going to leave, then I'll just call security. Better yet, why don't I call the police?" My breath hitched slightly, but I forced myself to remain calm. I knew I was in the right. The law was on my side. But the problem with people like Karen wasn't just their ignorance. It was their confidence in it. And as she dialed, her eyes gleamed with satisfaction, like she had won. She had no idea what was coming. Karen's fingers danced over her phone screen with the gleeful precision of someone who had no doubt she was about to get her way. "Yes, I'd like to report a fake service dog," she said loudly into the receiver, making sure the entire store could hear. "This person is trying to bring their pet into the grocery store and is refusing to leave." I clenched my jaw, gripping the cart handle tighter as several shoppers slowed their movements, their curious glances darting between Karen, Atlas, and me. My heart pounded, not out of fear but frustration. I had been here before. People who thought they knew everything about service dogs, about disabilities, about me. But they never did. Atlas remained calm, his head slightly raised, his ears flicking toward Karen's shrill voice but otherwise unmoved. He had been trained for high-stress situations, and while this was exactly an active combat zone, Karen's antics were certainly approaching battlefield levels of ridiculousness. Moments later, I heard it, the distinct sound of police sirens in the distance. My stomach twisted slightly, not because I was worried, but because I knew how this was going to play out. Karen had called them, fully expecting them to storm in, throw me out, and praise her for her valiant act of justice. Instead, she was about to get a much-needed education. The automatic doors whooshed open, and two uniformed officers walked in. They were both serious-looking men, their belts weighed down with radios, handcuffs, and holstered weapons. One was tall and stocky, the other leaner but just as authoritative. Karen, of course, wasted no time rushing over to them, flipping her hair dramatically as she pointed in my direction. There, she practically shrieked. That's the one! They're bringing an unauthorized animal into the store, and when I tried to tell them, they got aggressive with me. I blinked. Aggressive? The only thing I had done aggressively was attempt to buy some cereal in peace. The officers turned to me, their expressions unreadable. The taller one, Officer Reynolds, his name stitched onto his badge, was the first to speak. Ma'am, we received a complaint about a disturbance involving a service animal. I nodded, keeping my tone even. That's correct. I have a fully trained service dog, Atlas. He's wearing his vest. He's behaving exactly as he should, and I am protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Reynolds' eyes flicked down to Atlas, taking in the dog's professional posture, the pristine vest with official patches, and the entire lack of disruption he was causing. The leaner officer, whose nameplate read Officer Martinez, glanced back at Karen, his expression slightly less patient than his partner's. You said this was a pet, ma'am? Karen folded her arms, her confidence still sky-high. It is. Look at it. It's not a guide dog, and I know the rules. Only those big seeing-eye dogs are allowed. I sighed internally. Here we go. Reynolds turned back to me, his demeanor still professional. Ma'am, do you have any documentation for your service animal? I straightened, meeting his gaze. Under ADA law, I am not required to carry or present documentation for my service dog. The only questions you're legally allowed to ask me are, 1. Is this a service animal required for a disability? And 2. What tasks has he been trained to perform? Reynolds nodded slightly, as if impressed. All right then, let's make it official. Is this a service animal required for a disability? Yes, I answered firmly. And what tasks has he been trained to perform? I exhaled, relaxing slightly. Finally, we were moving past the nonsense. Atlas is trained to provide medical alerts and perform grounding techniques to prevent episodes related to my condition. I didn't go into further detail. I didn't have to. ADA law protected my right to privacy. Martinez glanced at Reynolds and nodded slightly. Reynolds turned back to Karen, his expression cooling. Ma'am, everything checks out. This is a legitimate service animal, and the law allows them to be here. Karen's face morphed from smug self-satisfaction to sheer disbelief. What? She sputtered. No, that can't be right. You're just taking their word for it. How do you know they're not lying? Martinez sighed, rubbing his temple. Because the law is very clear, ma'am. A service animal is not required to be a specific breed, nor do they have to be wearing any specific kind of identification. Furthermore, handlers are not required to show documentation, and this individual answered both legal questions correctly. He gestured toward me. They're well within their rights to have their service dog here. Karen's mouth flapped open, but no words came out. Reynolds took it a step further. In fact, ma'am, what you just did, trying to force a disabled person to leave a public space because of their service animal, is considered discrimination under federal law. Silence. Absolute, beautiful, caramel-laden silence. Karen's face turned a deep shade of red as several shoppers, who had been pretending not to eavesdrop, now openly stared. Her self-righteousness shriveled right before my eyes. I was just trying to help the store, she stammered, her voice losing its earlier force. Reynolds didn't waver. Ma'am, I'd advise you to educate yourself on ADA law before making accusations like this again. If the individual you reported wanted to take legal action, they could. Stores have been fined thousands of dollars for cases just like this. Karen looked wrecked. Her lips trembled, her confidence thoroughly shattered, and I could almost see the internal battle between her pride and her humiliation. Finally, without another word, she spun on her heel and stormed out of the store, her entire body stiff with indignation. A beat passed before Martinez turned back to me, shaking his head with an exasperated chuckle. People like that drive me crazy. You good? I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. Yeah, thanks for handling that. Reynolds gave a firm nod. No problem. You're within your rights. If the store gives you any trouble, tell them to contact us. With that, they left. And the moment they did, an older woman nearby clapped her hands together, her eyes twinkling with amusement. Well, that was satisfying. Another shopper, a man in his 30s, chuckled. She deserved that. I don't know why some people think they can just police everyone else's business. I gave them a small, grateful smile before turning back to my cart. Atlas, unbothered by the chaos, wagged his tail slightly, nudging my hand for reassurance. I scratched behind his ears. Well, buddy, I murmured, guess we're still getting that cereal. Just as I was about to continue my shopping, a voice called out behind me. Excuse me. I turned to see a well-dressed man in his late 40s approaching, his name tag reading Manager Greg. His expression was apologetic, and his hands were raised in a placating gesture. I saw everything that just happened, and I wanted to personally apologize for that woman's behavior. I arched a brow, still feeling the lingering frustration from the confrontation. I appreciate that, I said cautiously, but I hope this store understands that she was completely in the wrong. Greg nodded emphatically. Absolutely. I know the law, and I want to assure you that your service dog is always welcome here. That woman doesn't work for us. She's just a regular customer who took it upon herself to enforce rules she doesn't even understand. He sighed, shaking his head. She's actually been a problem here before. I tilted my head slightly. Oh. Greg's mouth pressed into a thin line. Let's just say she's had a few incidents, harassing employees, demanding special treatment, and even complaining about other service animals before. This isn't the first time we've had to deal with her, but it will be the last. I gave him a curious look. What do you mean? Greg sighed. After what just happened, I spoke with security, and we reviewed the store's policies on disruptive customers. This store has a strict zero-tolerance policy for discrimination or harassment of any customer, especially those with disabilities. She violated that policy today. He gestured toward the front entrance where, through the glass doors, I could see Karen standing outside, her arms crossed and her face twisted in fury as she argued with a store employee. She's being banned from this location. My eyebrows shot up. Seriously? Seriously, he confirmed. We don't tolerate that kind of behavior. And after the police explained to her that what she did was technically discrimination, well, she didn't exactly take it well. I watched as Karen continued her tantrum outside, waving her hands in exasperation at the security guard, who remained stoic in the face of her complaints. Then, as if to make the moment even more satisfying, the security guard reached into his pocket, pulled out a piece of paper, and handed it to her. Greg smirked slightly. That's her formal trespass notice. She's not allowed back here. I blinked. You guys don't mess around, huh? We don't, Greg said firmly. No one should have to deal with that kind of nonsense, especially not someone who's just trying to buy groceries with their service animal. And to be honest, it's long overdue. I glanced back at Karen, who was now red-faced, looking absolutely humiliated as she snatched the paper from the security guard and stomped toward the parking lot. Watching her meltdown felt like poetic justice, like the universe was finally balancing the scales. With a deep breath, I turned back to Greg. Well, I appreciate it. A lot of places don't handle situations like this properly. Greg offered a small smile. We try. And for what it's worth, I hope this doesn't discourage you from coming back here. If you ever have an issue again, ask for me personally. I nodded, my shoulders finally starting to relax. Thanks, Greg. I really appreciate it. No problem, he said, before adding with a grin, and don't worry. Your next purchase is on the house. I blinked. Wait, what? Greg chuckled. Consider it an apology from the store for having to deal with her. Grab whatever you need today, and it's on us. I wasn't expecting that, but I wasn't about to argue either. Well, in that case, I think I'll get some extra treats for Atlas. At the sound of his name, Atlas wagged his tail. Still calm, but clearly very interested in the idea of extra treats. Greg laughed. I think he deserves it. With that, I finally turned back to my cart, feeling lighter than I had in the last 20 minutes. The stress, the frustration, it had all led to this. A rare but deeply satisfying instance where justice had actually been served. As I made my way down the aisles again, shoppers gave me nods of approval, some even whispering about how glad they were that woman finally got what was coming to her. It felt good. Atlas trotted beside me, unfazed as ever, a steady presence in my life when people like Karen tried to make it harder than it needed to be. I scratched behind his ears and murmured, Well, buddy, I think we won this round. Atlas gave a small huff, almost like he agreed. And with that, we went to check out victorious.